Alright, what's up? It's Keith, and I'm here for another TV review. This time, I'm going to review The Punisher, which is the newest thing that Marvel and Netflix have done together. It stars John Bernthal as the titular character, Frank Castle, otherwise known as The Punisher, and also has Ebon Moss-Bachrach as David Lieberman and Micro. Ben Barnes plays Billy Russo. Amber Rose Reva plays Homeland Security agent Dina Madani. Daniel Weber plays Lewis Wilson, and then also Deborah Ann Wolf returns as Karen, is to name some of the characters who have some importance. So, as per usual, in case you haven't seen any of these TV reviews, there's going to be spoilers, which I'm going to not go in too in-depth with the whole season, but I'm going to talk a good bit. So The Punisher picks up basically right off with where Daredevil Season 2 ended, with Frank Castle going after the last remaining members of the gangs that were responsible for his family's deaths before he burns his Punisher attire and then kind of goes into hiding as Pete Castiglione working on the construction site. And he manages to stay out of, the public eye. Most people believe that the Punisher is dead until a new employee at the construction site gets mixed up with an attempted robbery, and when his comrades attempt to kill him and to get away with it, Frank steps in, kills them, and then he eventually goes towards the gang that they tried to rob, and he kills all the gang too. So, which puts him back on the radar to one David Lieberman, who goes by Micro, who is searching, who's been searching for Frank, and then tries to get him to join his cause. So while this is going on, you meet a couple characters. You meet Curtis, whom served with Frank in the Marines, and he's leading like a support group for soldiers with PTSD. And you also meet Lewis, whom is one such Army soldier who suffers from PTSD. And Lewis's story kind of becomes important as the show goes on. So eventually, Frank manages to make his way, and he steals his way into Micro's compound, and then starts interrogating Micro about who he is and what he does. And it turns out Micro was a NSA agent who got a copy of some footage from Kandahar, where Frank and his comrades in Operation Cerberus murdered a Middle Eastern police officer, and claiming that he was a terrorist. And then it's also revealed that Madani knew him, and that's why she's kind of going after the whole thing at Kandahar as well. So after a while, he finds out that the lead director of Homeland Security was in on it. So Frank goes and he kills the director of Homeland Security. Thus, Madani becomes the head person. And so as this is going on, Frank's meeting with Karen, and Karen's the one who helps him find and figure out who Micro is. And you see that Lewis is struggling with his PTSD. He joins almost like a right-wing group with another veteran, O'Connor, but later finds out that O'Connor isn't even a vet. He just is faking it so he can get people to join his cause, which causes Lewis to kill him in kind of a blind rage, and so on. So in an attempt to get to the bottom of Kandahar, Madani ends up meeting with Billy Russo, and they eventually kind of form a sexual relationship. And so while things are going on, there's a gun deal that's going on with the Greeks, but Frank and David show up because they need guns, and they end up stealing them, and thus Madani finds out that Frank's still alive. And so then there's a couple other things. Frank and David track one of his old squad mates who captured the video from Kandahar, and tracks him to the mountains. But then at the same time, Agent Orange, who is the leader of Operation Cerberus, orders him killed, and you find out that Billy is in on the whole Operation Cerberus thing. And so slowly, as kind of time goes on, that's kind of what's happening. Frank's trying to find and kill the people, the people still higher up involved. But then this is kind of thrown into the mix when Lewis decides to take matters into his own hands, and he becomes like a bomber, and he's blowing up government buildings, and he ends up taking Curtis hostage, and he threatens Karen, which, you know, sets Frank off. And then this eventually leads to a confrontation at a hotel where a senator who is a gun control advocate is there, and Lewis tries to get in and tries to kill him, but Frank intervenes, and this leads to this leads to a couple of things. It leads to, or for one, it leads to Frank finding out that Billy is partially responsible for his family's death, and also leads to Lewis's death. He blows himself up, but Frank manages to save Karen and whatnot. So then, as the story goes on, we kind of find out that that Agent Orange and his people figure out where Frank and David are at, which leads to a shootout. But then eventually, Rollins is Agent Orange's name, so I'll call him Rollins for the rest of the video. They eventually go to Madani in Homeland Security to kind of orchestrate a means to try to get them, and they end up faking David's death, and Frank gets captured, and then as Frank's getting tortured, he manages to get to Rollins and kills him. And then later in the series finale, Billy and Frank meet up at the carousel where Frank's family died, and they get into a shootout where Frank eventually wins, and instead of killing him, just basically grinds his face into a broken mirror and leaves him alive, so that he has to deal, and he has to, you know, wake up every day and realize what he did. And then Frank goes off, and the series kind of ends on a weird note, because Frank's like, yeah, this is the first time in my life that I don't have a war to go to. And he's like, he goes to one of the Curtis's like PTSD like help groups, and that's where the season kind of ends. So I think everything is really good. So because that's like the important stuff plots, but I really like John Berthal is a great Punisher. I think he kind of embodies the character very well, capturing that rage and that violence. I mean, like, the last 3 episodes of this show are some of the most violent and graphic stuff that Marvel's ever done, that Netflix has ever done, that I've seen. I mean, especially Frank gouging out Rollins' eyes with his thumbs, or, again, dragging Billy's face across the glass, or just the whole shootout scene, which is a big part of the trailer, where Frank takes on a bunch of this private military group. You know, it's some of the most graphic stuff that they've ever done, and it's cool. He kind of captures that quiet rage, but then he has a nice foil with David Lieberman, because David's family is alive, whereas Frank's isn't, and so David has camera set up so he can watch his family. And part of how Frank gets to David is he ends up visiting his family, and that's how he ends up getting into the compound. But then you see Frank repeatedly going and interacting with David's family is mostly on David's request, and you see, like, with David's family thinking he's dead, his wife Sarah kind of becomes attracted to Frank, but then he kind of turns her down and whatnot. But it's interesting to see, because it brings up an interesting question because of who suffers more. Because, you know, and it's easy to say Frank because his family's dead. But at the same time, you look at David, and it's like, you know, Frank doesn't have a choice. He wakes up every day, and he can't change the fact that his family's gone. Whereas David, not only does he sit there and kind of torture himself by continually watching his family, but at the same time, he has to constantly make that decision to not break down and go see them for their safety. And so you can make the argument of who suffers more, and I think that's a very, very, very interesting dynamic. But, like, one of the overarching themes of the season is, like, how PTSD and how veterans are treated in after, you know, they come home, and that's, like, the whole thing with Lewis. And I think they do that fairly well, because it's fairly realistic for the most part, you know, and the whole PTSD thing. I think this is a very adult, very mature thing, and I really like that Marvel and Netflix have done this. Really quickly, there's only 3 things that I really think the season suffers from. So, for one thing, I think they kind of messed up Karen a little bit. So, I get having Karen in The Punisher, because her and Frank have a really close relationship in it. and it almost becomes borderline romantic over the course of this season. And so maybe if there is a season 2, maybe they'll explore that more. But I feel like they didn't use her enough. Like, she's only in like 4 or 5 episodes, so like maybe they should have used her more, have her be a bigger part if they were going to include her at all. But I do like their dynamic, though. Like I said, their dynamic is very interesting. It makes it seem that Karen was aware that Frank Castle was alive the whole time, that she was aware. And again, there's like there's a bond there, and it's very, very deep. You can kind of tell the 2 actors, John Bernthal and I forget her name already, Deborah Ann Woll, have great chemistry on screen. One of the other things that kind of, which again maybe they can do in another season, is there's not really like, there's a little bit of talks about like of themes like gun control, but at the same time there isn't any. The show kind of doesn't really make a stance either way, and I get it why they don't do it, because like if you do it this season and like, you know, Frank Castle decides he's not going to kill people anymore, or you know, or that that's not him anymore, then you can't have a future season. Like the way that this season ends, it's like, hey, he just doesn't have a war. He's gotten his revenge. He's avenged the deaths of his family. It's not that he's done killing people. It's just that he doesn't have a war to fight anymore. So maybe, you know, if they do a season 2, they could do that. But I don't know. And then the third thing was, I think they kind of messed up the whole thing with Lewis, because it could have been an interesting thing. Because first off, they don't really hint at all towards why, because he just kind of snaps partway through the whole thing. He just almost randomly just kind of snaps. I almost wish that it would have been a more of a progressive thing, but then also that like maybe his actions would have had more of an effect on Frank, like the fact that you know, Lewis has kind of become a vigilante, and then Frank kind of sees that, and maybe he kind of sees him, and that's why he kind of doesn't want to do things anymore, and he's more willing to work with Madani now, like after seeing that. He's like, maybe we do need to work with her. But yeah, I just think they could have done that more. And like there's other things they did well. Like the Madani story is interesting because she's like she wants revenge in a lot of ways for the death of her friend. What's the dude's name? Ahmed. Give me a second. I have it here. Ahmed Zubair. And then eventually her partner gets killed. It's Billy that kills him, and she kind of suffers from like that survivor's guilt thing, and that was really cool. And so there's a lot of great characters and a lot of great things. It's just there's a couple little things. Otherwise, this is one of the better things that Marvel and Netflix have ever done. I would probably put it up there at like 3 or 4. At least it's definitely better. I would say it's definitely better than Iron Fist, Luke Cage, or The Defenders. Once we start getting up to either of the seasons of Daredevil or Jessica Jones, it becomes a little bit more iffy, where I can't necessarily say, but it's definitely up there in the top 4. And I enjoyed it. Like they do sort of leave it open for there to be another season. And I hope they do another season. But you know, who knows? The one thing though I do say is I don't think they should do more than 2 seasons, mostly because in my opinion, Frank Castle is a much better anti-hero side character than as a main character protagonist. Like, even though I think he did good, but you kind of have to, like, the overt focus on him and kind of making him a quote-unquote good guy kind of had to happen in order for there to be character progression. Whereas I feel like maybe his characterization in Daredevil Season 2 is much better. But hopefully going forward, they use him more. Like, and this idea, and it's just from a pure of like they're kind of almost opposite in some way. I think it would be cool for Luke Cage and the Punisher to kind of, you know, butt heads or something in like Luke Cage Season 2 or something. It'd be just, I don't know. I think it'd be kind of cool. So yeah, so that's my review of the Punisher. So at some point, I think we're planning on ranking all of the seasons of Marvel's Netflix shows. So we're gonna rank, you know, both seasons of Daredevil, Jessica Jones, now the Punisher, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and the Defenders, and we're gonna rank them in order. There's gonna be some other reviews going up sometime soon. I know movies. I think basically the only stuff left really is Star Wars, and then we have our top movies list. But there's all kinds of good videos. You should definitely check all this stuff out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And you know what? Thank you guys for watching.